All right. Let's get started with this next session. Years ago, when I started understanding what an entrepreneurial ecosystem was, it was hard to understand what ecosystem develop. Like when you're someone that comes from the business community, someone that comes from industry, from the for-profit world, to really kind of wrap your mind around what a true ecosystem looks like, it was hard. It was a hard transition for me to really kind of understand those types of things. I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of people. A couple of them are in the room tonight, actually, which is pretty cool. So I knew that when we got our next guest in the room that some of the other ones would make an appearance, and the other one's sitting right over there, Mr. Andy Stoll. So had the opportunity to learn from a lot of people about what ecosystems were, and how ecosystems could be healthy and vibrant and so on. But really one of the big turning points for me that made me understand that this could be a career, that this could be something that you really, like a job, I guess, was when I attended my first eShip Summit. And then I think it was maybe after that first eShip Summit, I actually read a book called The Rainforest that really helped form some of the opportunities that I'm kind of pursuing with Keystone. So not much original thought in what we're doing here with Keystone. There's been a lot of folks that have kind of created that footprint, and I'm honored to have this gentleman up here on stage because he's been instrumental in kind of shaping my views of what this ecosystem that we're working on here, this community that we're developing here in Kansas City can be, based on his life experiences and the things that I read in his book and the conversations that we've had over time and so on. So, Victor, you don't know this, but I have an annoying habit of not introducing people. So I'm going to have you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll just dive into it. I've got some questions for you, and then I know you've got some information to share. So I'm glad you're here, man.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. It's amazing what you've birthed here. I mean, this is something I remember years ago. This was like this like inkling in the back of your head, like there ought to be this Keystone Innovation District in Kansas City, and to watch something come like this, and then you had a pandemic kind of trip you up in the middle, but you kept at it, and it's just amazing, and to come to life, and then you see like the community form. It's just beautiful. So congratulations on
thank you
what you've done.
Appreciate
here.
that.
So myself. So I've had a really circuitous career and path in my life, and in many ways it kind of is sort of metaphoric for the rainforest and ecosystems in general too. So I've been involved in entrepreneurship for really entrepreneurial support and advocacy for over 2 decades now, which surprisingly makes me a bit of an old timer in this space. I never thought it would be when I first got into it, because when I got into it, there were people that I met that were doing it in the 70s and the 80s. And so there's a long legacy of people, and you kind of end up passing the baton forward on this work. So I got into, I realized later on why I loved entrepreneurship and innovation so much. It was because it had a really big role in my life. And so my parents actually were immigrants from Taiwan. And for them, sending me to college was really important. So when I got into Harvard, they wanted to send me, but they couldn't afford it. And so they actually had to start a business to be able to afford to send me to college. That was after getting a second mortgage on their house. So I saw the power of entrepreneurship firsthand because that business was able to make it. It was actually the second time they'd tried, and it was able to pay for college, and then even build revenue for them and build retirement for them. But I saw how hard it was, and I came to realize that it didn't need to be that hard. That a lot of those impediments and barriers were things that had been put up by society, whether intentionally or unintentionally, mostly unintentionally, and that people that were trying to create new things, fix problems, make things better, and innovate, had so many barriers that were thrown in their way, and that it didn't need to be that way, that we could actually make it easier for people. And so this idea of the rainforest and the idea of ecosystems really is that it's a very simple idea at its very core, which is that when you're trying to create something of value in the world, it's a 360 problem. Like everything affects everything else, and it affects your ability to create that value, to fix that thing, and to make things better. And when you take that very expansive, universal view of how you innovate and create value, it starts to shape how you think about, well, how do you design communities? How do you design cities? How do you run economies? How do you make things better in the world at large by realizing that everything happens when, everything starts with two people sitting down and saying, how do we make this better?
Yeah, it's but you saw entrepreneurship firsthand at a young age or at a formative age, but that didn't stop you from going out and starting your own venture, right? So you've been in the startup world as a founder. So talk to us a little bit about that experience of kind of creating your own venture and creating a company, and let's kind of start there, and then work into kind of your career and what got you to Right to Start.
Yeah, well, the venture. So it actually didn't start with the venture. I actually got involved in a whole bunch of other ways. So I actually started because I mentioned my parents are immigrants, and I saw that just by being the son of immigrants, you realize that the world's very uneven, and there's pockets where people are prosperous and rich and doing well, and there's many other places where they're not. And when you are raised in that kind of environment as an immigrant family, you question a lot. Like, why is that? Why are some places better off and other places not? Why do some people have it easier? Why do some people have it harder? And you realize that there are people that are very capable and smart but are just in environments and circumstances where they aren't able to let that talent out. And so I always thought, well, the world shouldn't be that way. And so I should try to go into government and policy, because you can shape society if you go into government. So I actually went into government thinking, well, that's how you can make things happen. When I got into government, I found lots of great people doing great work, but then I realized, well, government derives so much of its value from what the business sector is doing, and that's where tax money comes from. And I realized in government, not a lot of people looked at business for leadership. They look for where value creation is coming from, and then you go to business. And so I moved into business, and I ended up practicing law and working with a lot of large institutions and companies. But then I realized it wasn't just business in general. It was the most innovative businesses. It was the technology businesses that were driving most of the value in business. So then I ended up going to technology businesses. And then I realized, well, it's the creation of those businesses, the startup process that happens. And then I got into the work of entrepreneurial support. So I ended up helping run an organization in California that actually helps the support of startup companies. It was an early ESO in Los Angeles. And through that work, then I realized, well, it's not just tech startups, it's the capital that feeds them. So I got into venture capital work. We built a venture studio. We started investing into companies and started building companies. And that's where I started to start some of the companies I got involved with. And when I got into capital, though, I realized, well, it's actually not capital at all, because I actually moved to Silicon Valley at that point. And when I finally got to Silicon Valley and was immersed in the community of venture capitalists and entrepreneurs and innovators there, I realized it really wasn't capital, because there's money everywhere. And that money turns into capital through this process of just human imagination and possibility. And ultimately, it's narrative. It's the stories we tell ourselves and the culture that causes that story to emerge. And that's actually what made Silicon Valley happen. So after I got through all of that process of going from business to technology to startups to capital formation, that you realize it's actually really simple on the other side. It's that there's a great phrase that it's the simplicity on the other side of complexity. And at the end, you realize it's essentially the stories we tell ourselves and human culture that actually drives the success and prosperity of entire societies. And then once I got into that, I realized, well, I've got to somehow teach that. And I've got to show that and share that with the world. And that's where the rainforest came from, writing the book, trying to explain like how this stuff really happens. And then coming to Kansas City with the Kauffman Foundation, where I ran the entrepreneurship department. And we took a lot of those ideas and we really tried to share them out with the world. And now, fortunately, there's hundreds of communities across the US and the world using those ideas now in economic development and ecosystem building. And that's really exciting. And that's led to the work I'm doing now with Right to Start. And I can talk about that more as well.
I guess my question for you, as I hear you talk about this, when you talk about the journey that you've been on and the progression, it makes perfect sense. And I wonder how much of that is the progression in a hindsight way is easier to tell the story. In the moment, how intentional was it step by step? How entrepreneurial was it step by step of, I want to go try this. I want to go do this. I've seen this problem. I've seen this gap. Did you have any idea that this is where you'd end up and you'd be doing this kind of work? Or was it very much easier to tell the story now and the progression of it now in hindsight?
Yeah, I had no idea where I was going to end up with any of this stuff. I think one way to think of it as actually trying to go to the source of the river. So I was kind of looking back now, I was starting at the end of the river where I saw all the sediment coming out and saying, well, I wonder where the river's coming from and what's causing these problems upstream. And so every stage of my life was saying, well, I think there's another thing upstream of the problem, so I need to go upstream to try to figure out how to get to that problem. And so that's kind of where it's kept leading me, as just trying to continue to ask that question of, well, what's wrong here? And how do we get to the source of this? What's underlying this problem? But it wasn't clear at the time. It's only in retrospect that you see it all, which is kind of the story of every entrepreneurial process, right?
Absolutely. Let's just jump to start, because I think what you're doing now. So what I do want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the work that you did while you were at Kauffman, because I think if my memory serves from the conversations we had, it was very formative into kind of the next step that you took with Right to Start, because you guys had a focus on what are those policy changes, what are those things that need to shift to support entrepreneurial ecosystems. So talk a little bit about your time at Kauffman, and maybe describe how eShip Summit came about and some of the things that you were able to accomplish while you were at the Kauffman Foundation.
Well, and a lot of people in Kansas City don't even know this, but the Kauffman Foundation really has been the leading philanthropy in the world in terms of entrepreneurial development, and we're very fortunate to have it here in Kansas City. And when I had the chance to come to KC to lead that department, in fact, one of my predecessors at Kauffman had said, if you ever have a chance to lead the entrepreneurship department at Kauffman, say yes and figure out why you did it later. And so so I did that, and I jumped in, and I think what I realized that Kauffman had was the platform. It has the capital and the money to do great stuff and to take risks to do it, but it has the platform to be able to take ideas and disseminate them at large. And essentially, one of the most powerful things you can do for a people is to actually give them capacity and to unleash that potential within them. And so at Kauffman, there's that ability to actually teach and share information and build capacity and knowledge and lift up lots and lots of people. And so I realized that was kind of a once-in-a-lifetime chance to do that. And so when I finally got to Kauffman, it's sort of like when you get into a position like that, if you've never been in a philanthropy, it's like a whole new airplane cockpit. Like there's all these new levers that you don't know how to pull, and so when you finally get there, and I started to realize okay, this lever does that, and that lever adjusts the altitude, whatever, and you start to figure that out. But one of the things I came to realize we really needed was a major conference and a community and a shared practice around how do you build rainforests or ecosystems at scale. And to have a lot of people involved in that process. So at Kauffman, I was fortunate enough to be able to find some amazing people. And so actually some of them are here in the room right now. We've got some phenomenal people here who've actually were part of that work at Kauffman. I'm grateful they're here to hear me talk yet again. They heard me talk plenty when I was at Kauffman, and they're still here.
I think they're here to wish you a happy birthday. I think they've heard you talk a lot. Yeah.
They're here for the cake. Yeah.
For the cake and the tacos.
And so that's where the eShip work came out of. So the eShip Summit was a summit that really needed to happen. At some point, someone needed to say, this is how we should do it. Because what a lot of people don't even remember now. Now, if you go on LinkedIn, you look at ecosystem builders as titles, there's thousands of people across the country and the world that call themselves ecosystem builders. There didn't used to be just a few years ago. That was not even a thing. And so what we wanted to do is to say, you can do this. This is a thing you can do. It's a profession you can do. It's a practice. There's a way of doing it that's good. And there's a method of excellence to this work. And so the eShip Summit became that conference where people came together. And then there's a playbook that was built on how to do that in a popular, easy to understand way. There was a community of practice that lasted after the summit. And the ripple effects of that continue out to this day. It's really exciting to see that.
Was there anything about that surprised you? Or what were the key learnings from that process of bringing those, before they called themselves ecosystem builders, bringing them together, the process of I vividly remember being up at the convention center and having all of these people in a room that were all trying to accomplish the same thing and all sharing that they were running into some of the same issues, but still all understanding that every community was unique and the stakeholders within the community were unique and some of the things they could do were unique. It was a big learning experience for me. I'm curious for you, since you'd already had some of that perspective, since you'd already written a book about, kind of some of the, I think the ideas behind what ecosystems are. What did you learn from the eShip Summit and that experience?
I think coming into that work, I already had known that this was a tribe that hadn't yet realized it was a tribe. Like I'd been around the country and parts of the world working with entrepreneurial communities, trying to figure out how policy could shape that, how economic development initiatives could shape that. And I realized every community may be different, every society may be different, every country's different, the laws are different, but the overall mental framework is the same. Like the underlying way you approach it is kind of the same. There's universality to it. And I realized there were a lot of people that needed a lot of help and they didn't know each other, and that there was power in bringing them together. What I didn't appreciate is how electric it would be. I thought it was I knew it needed to happen. What was really cool and surprising was just how people took it and ran with it and made it their own, right? And there's a whole language now. There's tools now. There's methods and there's communities formed around this work that I never would have imagined. And I mean, this place, like with the work you're doing, is phenomenal. And just seeing this happen has been really gratifying to watch kind of the ecosystem movement really happen. And ironically, it's like people in this work know it, but then I try to convey it to our leaders or people in power. They still don't understand it. So it's like a movement happening that political leadership or economic leadership still doesn't get. But it's a big deal right now. It's fundamentally reshaping the way that community-driven economic development is happening in this country, and the leadership doesn't quite get it yet. But we're at that moment now where it's just starting to break through on the scene.
So let's start to dive into that a little bit, because there was some work, as I mentioned, if memory serves, there was some work that kind of led to kind of where you're at now that was happening at Kauffman. There was there was an acknowledgement that some policy work needed to be done around how can we better support these ecosystems, how can we better support entrepreneurs in the United States. And that was work that happened while you were there as well, right? And that you guys had finished just prior to you leaving.
Yeah, and Kauffman had been doing some great policy work even before I got there. I need to acknowledge that, and I've gotten to work with some of these wonderful people who've done that great work, and they'd laid a lot of this foundational structure for the policy and entrepreneurship. But what I realized at Kauffman was, when you finally get into that airplane cockpit, you start to look out at 30,000 feet and you realize, oh my God, like you see the landscape and you see the gaps in the landscape. And one of the really big gaps was that entrepreneurship really was not a public issue anywhere, like whether it's at the local or city level or the national level in this country. And I started to realize that other countries were doing it. So other countries had started to make entrepreneurship a top priority. Like presidents of countries were getting elected on entrepreneurship as like a major platform issue. And then I realized that the way we've been doing it in the U.S. had become a hindrance. It'd become an impediment and a problem because we'd come to treat entrepreneurship as its own special interest topic, which means like when you'd go to a political leader, for instance, and you'd say, "Hey, we're here to talk about entrepreneurship," they'd say, "Oh, that's great. So you're lobbying or advocating for this issue, just like the small business community, just like the corporations, just like the universities. You're yet another one of those groups." And so they would give you you'd fight for a long time and you get a little, you get your little subsidy or your little program or whatever. And I realized that was a problem because we could never compete against large corporations, big financial institutions, large universities. We were always going to get the scraps. And so we needed to reframe it and think about how do you think about entrepreneurship policy writ large as a whole thing that's bigger than we're just looking for this little tiny piece. And so at Kauffman, we put together what is called America's New Business Plan, which is a policy roadmap for entrepreneurship that's all encompassing. It's 360. It's essentially recognizing that it's an ecosystem, and it covers capital, it covers support systems like healthcare, it covers knowledge systems like education and workforce training, it covers issues like red tape and bureaucracy, and it's nonpartisan. It really cuts across all these issues and says, if you believe in entrepreneurship as something that drives job growth and GDP and helps fight poverty and inequality, you've got to look at it as a 360 issue across all these areas of policy. And we put that out there. And there ended up being over 100 organizations that signed on to it. and it really has been powerful in sort of putting the voice of entrepreneurship onto giving it a national voice and putting it onto the scene.
But that wasn't enough. You felt like you needed to go. That wasn't enough. You felt like you needed to go take action.
Well, there wasn't enough because one thing we could not do at Kauffman was to organize at the grassroots and to build like a real operating network. And in prior lifetimes, I'd actually been involved in a bit of politics and policy work. And you cannot replace, in a democracy, you cannot replace on the ground organizing, getting the voices out, and changing policy at every level. And then I had some really smart people who told me, look, Victor, entrepreneurship isn't a national issue because, people in DC are kind of in their world. They've got their issues that are important, and by and large, they're the issues that they've been working on for several decades. But the way to do it is from the ground up, in a democracy, all the great ideas come from the bottom up. They come from the grassroots. Build a grassroots movement, get a bunch of states involved in this, get a bunch of cities involved, get a lot of citizens involved in this, and create a voice and create a wave that actually gets Washington to pay attention. And that's what we've been doing. So when I left Kauffman, we launched this organization called Right to Start, which is next month is coming up on its 3rd anniversary. And Right to Start is a nonprofit organization.
Do you want me to jump into? You ready, or you want?
Not yet with that. Wait a second. We got a little thing for you here.
All right.
It's a nonpartisan nonprofit organization fighting for the rights of entrepreneurs, and we call it Right to Start because we actually are we're trying to shift the way we think of entrepreneurship. We're trying to think of it as a basic human right. That the idea is that everyone has that capacity in them to be entrepreneurial, to be able to. They've got a dream. They have the right to pursue that dream. They have a right to have a society that supports them or at least doesn't get in their way. And that it cuts across all these issues from taxation to regulation to capital access to workforce and education to contracting to healthcare to everything. And that everyone deserves a right. And it's not just the entrepreneurs that want it. It should be all their friends. It should be their families, their neighbors, their relatives, the customers. Everyone that is involved within the ecosystem should care about this issue. And by making it a basic human right, it's something that everyone can take with them and own. It's not just something that every month 3 out of 1,000 people start a company. It's not just those 3 people that matter. It's the 997 others that matter as well.
Right.
So that's the right to start. It's basically a right that belongs to everybody, whether you decide to exercise it or not today. When you want to do it, it's right there for you, and society should be able to support and protect that.
And so your focus. So 3 years ago, you started the organization. How's it going? I guess let's just go with that. Like, how has the work been, and what kind of things have you learned as you've gone through the process of this grassroots work?
It's been it's gone harder and easier than we thought in many ways. Yep. So harder, we had a pandemic that got in the way of this as well.
Yeah.
So
I remember
through a bit of. So
I was doing a placemaking initiative at the time, and place got punched in the face.
Well, grassroots organizing isn't the easiest thing either in a pandemic. So we launched it, and so that ended up being harder, but it also made us leaner, and it also launched us virtually, and so we were able to do via Zoom what before it's hard to remember. There was a time when Zoom was still awkward. But like you can build organizations now nationally with video conferencing,
right?
And so that's really we were able to take advantage of that fully, and we did. And it was easier in many ways because I think we've sort of lit a fire. It was waiting to be lit, and I think we're finding that it really does resonate with people. So right now we reach into 28 states. We've got 14 field organizers. We have a network of 25 ambassadors. We had someone just join yesterday. And this year we had 13 state legislatures introduce 30 of our bills. Most of them are called Right to Start Acts, actually in their names. And we've got about half a dozen states where the bill is actually still moving through. We've got actually passed like a number of state legislative chambers. We're really, really close to having one state completely get it all the way through and get a governor to sign it into law. We're that close right now. We got really, really close twice this year, really close last year, but we got about half a dozen states we're still alive in right now. So, yeah.
So I got to ask, we have this amazing knack in this country of politicizing everything, and creating the us's and the thems and the the different views on this. To me, entrepreneurship should be like things, and healthcare and education should be things that aren't political. right? Have you found that this is turning into or has turned into something that there's a, it's the how we do it that is different on each side, but it's universally something that everybody agrees we should do? Or there are some people who are still not on board with the idea that entrepreneurship should be important, I guess?
We have managed to build bipartisan coalitions
Okay.
in almost every state we've been in, and like overwhelmingly in a lot of states, including in Missouri and Kansas and Arkansas and Oklahoma and other states like in this vicinity. And the reason we've been able to do it is we've avoided polarization, and we've stuck to what do these laws do, and actually how do you make people's lives better? Because I think what I've discovered, and this is sort of surprising to a lot of people, if you spend time with legislators and you get them off of Twitter and you get them off the cameras, they're actually really collaborative and practical. 90% of them. There's about 10% of them that may be, out there,
Sure.
But that's the world. 90% of them actually want to get something done, and if you can give them a way to talk about these issues that are practical and actually make people's lives better, they want to do it. In fact, we found legislators to be so hungry for meaningful, practical, bipartisan things to do. They've just eaten it up. I'll give you one example. So I took a road trip last fall through half the country, and I was in the Appalachian town in Kentucky, Berea, Kentucky, which is on the eastern edge of Kentucky. And
my neck of the woods.
Are you from?
I was born in West Virginia. So
okay. Well, we just brought on an advocate in West Virginia, field organizer out there.
Might be somebody in my family. I mean, we're all related.
Your third.
I can say that I'm from West Virginia.
Your third cousin. We just hired as the advocate in West Virginia.
Fantastic.
But in Berea, the one evening I was there, and I met someone on the city council, and told her about Right to Start and the issues we're looking to advocate for and the things they could do in the city. And she said, "I love these ideas." She said, we've been looking for things that my colleagues across the aisle and I can work on together, because they were actually getting polarized in the city council with federal issues. Even though a lot of these federal issues have nothing to do with local politics, a lot of these federal issues were kind of creating wedges within the local city government. And she said, we've been looking for something to work on together, but we didn't have anything to work on together. But I love it. And so that was that evening. The next morning, this city council woman was also an entrepreneur. So next morning I went to her restaurant for breakfast, and I ran into her. And she said, I already talked to my colleagues. We're going to do this together. It was like that fast, right? To actually have like ideas that overnight can bring parties together and actually bring across these ideological divides.
Is it that they just don't know the what? They just don't know what the action that they can take that will make an impact? Is that literally kind of what it comes down to?
They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Like, they care about entrepreneurship in the abstract. They know it's an issue. They know it's important. And you've given the data, they love it even more. But what is the specific thing to do? They actually don't know. And it actually, I think, points to how the national parties aren't helping them very much right now. The national parties are not saying, oh, here's what you can do actually at the local level to make a difference in your cities. And so we're coming in, we're filling that void. We're saying, actually, there's simple things you can do. Like in a city, create an office of entrepreneurship that has a one-stop shop to help people navigate the red tape. It's like simple concept. Not hard. It's a bit hard to do because every city is a bit complicated and there's a lot of red tape, but it's a simple concept. Entrepreneurs love it because they're like, well, of course you would do that, right? It's so complicated to navigate all this stuff, right? You open this place, it's like a lot of stuff to fill out, right?
Right.
But you have here in Kansas City, you have a one-stop shop. It actually helps you get through this stuff, and but just simple things like that. And we find just by giving people examples, giving them information, giving them references to how you can do it better, and saying that this is a bipartisan issue, and showing them examples on both sides of how it's being done, people love it. Like it's the simple, basic things of governing a society that aren't being done right now. And if you step in and you say, actually, 1, 2, 3, you can do this, and we can show you examples, people are very willing to adopt it.
With the CHIPS Act, with the tech hubs work that's being done at the federal level, and the funding that's starting to flow down, it seems like there is a push to fund some of the more traditional, push that money through some of the more traditional channels, university centers, things along those lines. Important, and I think a catalyst for a lot of, I think historically things that have happened from an economic development in this country. I'm thinking about jumpstarting America right now, right? Like that. We make a federal investment in research and technology, and for the next 20 or 30 years, you see an economic boom that comes from that. I'm wondering, why isn't there more of an acknowledgement that funding entrepreneurial ecosystems could be that jumpstarting America moment for us? I mean, the core of this is my belief. This is Kevin on his soapbox. If you think about what separates America, it's ingenuity, right? It's the invention. It's some of the things that we've been forced to do through the very young. We're a very young country. Is there not an understanding that that some of that funding can be pushed into ecosystems? Are they not making that connection yet?
There are not, generally, by and large. There's a disconnect in this country between what people see at the grassroots in local communities, what they know works in local communities, and what the national leadership thinks is effective policy. And I've seen this firsthand. National policy still is, let's focus on the big stuff, the big levers, big semiconductor companies, big universities, big corporations, big banks, because those are levers where if you pull it, you can see an immediate result, right? Mm-hmm. Ecosystem work, entrepreneurial development is slow. We don't actually measure it very well, so you can't see success and track it very effectively. And so the narrative is missing. So I know personally, going around the country, talking to people doing this work, at the local level, everyone gets it. They're like, of course, this is what happens, and this is how we make this work. When you go to Washington, it's actually an uphill fight to actually say this matters. And this is where I say the issue right now in the country is actually, they think it's about left versus right, but it's actually about big versus small.
Yeah.
And they don't know that. And if you realize that essentially the system essentially perpetuates bigness, right? Institutions in power, whether it's financial institutions, educational institutions, governmental institutions. And you need that, right? Sort of yes and. You need big companies to do what they do because they provide a lot of infrastructure for our basic goods. You need big universities, et cetera. But it's out of whack right now. It's out of balance. And in economic development, we've been able to see this shift happening, which is the practice of economic development as a profession is shifting now because they've moved away from only going after large corporate incentives to let's build from the ground up. Let's build entrepreneurial capacity in cities and communities. That is actually happening right now. But in the larger realm of like broader government policy, that has not happened yet. And so we need voices to rise up. In fact, actually, this is probably a good time to put up the slides I was talking about.
Yeah.
Let's do it. So at Right to Start, we've actually put together, so we could actually use your help on this. This will just take a few seconds. We put together a statement of principles about what we believe, and and I'll read these for you. But then you can actually you can actually sign this online. Go back one slide.
Oh, I don't.
Is there one slide? There you go.
Yep,
Okay,
yep,
statement of principles. I'll just read this. We are born to be starters, makers, doers, dreamers. Each of us has a fundamental right to realize an idea, create something of value, and pursue our entrepreneurial dreams. That simplest of ideas, that all of us have this right to start, is basic to the human condition. When that right is widespread, prosperity ripples across millions of lives in the form of jobs, productivity, dynamism, and opportunity. It's time to unleash that right in all of us, regardless of race, place, background, or walk of life. That means breaking down barriers and giving all of us opportunities to start, grow, and flourish. And the next slide. We agree with these principles and support policies to realize them. Number one, everyone has a fundamental right to start. We have the right to pursue our entrepreneurial dreams and shape the destiny of our own lives. Number two, we must protect and nourish starters. Society should provide fair access to resources for all of us to start and grow. Number three, to level the playing field, tilt it. Americans don't seek favors, but every starter deserves an equal shot to succeed. Number four, renewal comes bottom up. Communities and nations are transformed by lifting up their people. Number five, grow ecosystems to grow economies. Prosperity for all comes by breaking down barriers, fostering trust, bridging differences. And six, all of us matter. Every big idea starts small and vulnerable and needs all of our help to grow. So that's our statement of principles. That's basically what Right to Start was birthed on. And so you can sign it online. It takes like 10 seconds to do it. So that QR code right there.
Get your phones out, everybody.
Get your phones out.
We're all going to sign right now.
Sign this thing.
If you don't sign right now, that means you hate entrepreneurs.
You hate entrepreneurs. You are one of the enemy. No. Please sign. It means a lot to us, and it's easy to do. And so we're trying to get 10,000 signatures over the coming year. And next year is an election year in this country. When we get 10,000 signatures, we're going to give this to the president, the leaders of Congress, the leading presidential candidates, all 50 governors, and other political leaders across the country to say, this is this is what we believe. We want you to join this.
Victor, this is the irony of this conversation in my mind, is that all the big companies that, we talk about big versus small. Somebody was on this stage not too long ago, and I'll give him credit by name. Jim Erickson from the EDC Kansas City was here, and he says, look, we spend a lot of money to try to attract headquarters to the city, but when you look at the big companies that we call our, corporate oaks, if you will, in Kansas City, almost without exception, and I think the trick question is find the one that doesn't meet this criteria. They all started here. They all grew here. And we forget that, and his quote that I've been using a lot is, every startup is a headquarters. So why aren't we attracting more headquarters here by attracting more startups to this community, or nurturing the startups that are here? Because they will eventually become the big. And I feel like that's the disconnect, is that, we talk about these big companies and we talk about moving the levers, and that big corporations and industry are going to do that. But even, nationally, you think about any of those big companies, they all started somewhere. They were all startups at some point in their life cycle. Why is that not something that these policymakers appreciate? Is that we're so focused on the short term, so focused on the near term? Is that the issue?
Well, here's the issue, which is our leaders respond to us. And so if we're not talking about it as we here in the room talk about it because we're kind of the converted, right? This is kind of the choir preaching to the choir. But everybody else out there, like, you talk to your family or your relatives and they're like, huh? They sort of like tilt their head and they're like, what do you mean? And so I think that's the issue, is as a society, we need to pull the rest of the people into this conversation, because that's when the politicians respond. And so we need to raise our voices up, and we need to actually say, look, this matters to all of us. And when we do enough of that, our leaders will pay attention. The challenge is entrepreneurs don't have a lot of time and money relative to large corporations, large institutions. They can hire lobbyists, they can hire the PR firms, they know how to get this stuff out there. Entrepreneurs don't have a voice, and this issue has really been lost in our system. And in many ways, it's because we've taken it for granted. I think a lot of people just assume, well, this is a great entrepreneurial country. We're a startup nation. We hustle, we're scrappy, we're smart, we figure out what to do. And so it gets taken for granted a lot. And you hear politicians talk about, oh, right, entrepreneurs and small businesses are the backbone of this country. That's like this almost cliche that they say all the time.
Sure.
Then they don't do anything about it.
Yeah, they're pandering for votes when they say that.
Yeah, in fact, during the last presidential campaign, they actually put that question out to the candidates, the presidential candidates. I remember they said, you got entrepreneurs that are, struggling, small businesses struggling, venture capital is, moving to certain places versus others. And both presidential candidates just sort of whiffed at that ball, right? It was a slow pitch over home plate. They whiffed because they don't even know what to say. And they don't know that people care about this issue. And so we did this bipartisan poll at Right to Start. We actually did the first ever major poll. We had two pollsters, one on the left and one on the right. And we polled 1,000 voters about entrepreneurship. And we asked them whether they cared about this issue or not. And we found that if you actually don't use the word entrepreneur and you say, is it important to America that everyone has the basic and equal chance to be able to start and grow their own business? Is that important to America? 92% of Americans agree with that statement. All right, so if you break it down to actual language, like normal English, people love this issue, but they just don't know what to do about it. And so there's a disconnect. Then we ask them, what are the most important issues in America? And this is not on there because they think it's climate change, gun control, healthcare, important issues for sure. This issue, but entrepreneurship as an issue isn't on that agenda. So that's up to us now. We've got to put it on the agenda. We need to get our friends and families and neighbors onto this issue.
It seems like one of the top issues that everybody talks about right now in this political climate is jobs, though. And all the research has shown that, like, entrepreneurship, small business, net new jobs come from this sector.
Almost all net job growth is from young businesses.
So where is that lost on them?
People don't know.
Okay.
Only 18% of Americans answer that question right. Where do jobs come from? The more people said it was big corporations and old companies than they said it's young businesses.
Oh man, as somebody who sat through year after year cycle of laying people off, I'll help educate them on that one.
Yeah. So only 18% of people know that. And that's probably just random guessing. I think a lot of 18% of people just randomly guess that answer. So that's our issue right there, is people don't know that. They don't know this is where jobs come from, and they don't know, therefore they don't connect it to the jobs issue.
Interesting. So what's next for Right to Start? So like you're gearing up for the election. You're trying to get the 10,000 signatures and put this in front of the policymakers today. I guess I've never considered this, but the language that you've used tonight makes me so you're the lobbyist arm for all of the entrepreneurs.
Advocacy
arm.
IRS, if you're watching,
six to
advocacy,
one, 6 to 1, half dozen to another. Yeah, fair enough. I just sat through a symposium on social ventures where the guy told us, "Don't worry about the IRS thing." So, and everybody in the room went, "No, you got to know what you got to think about the IRS." All right, so yeah, what's next?
We're building this. I mean, eventually we want this in all 50 states and every city in the country. We're building out local chapters right now. So we've got field organizers in communities which are sponsored, and then we've got volunteer chapters that are starting to organize in different cities too, where people they get together and they say, how do we talk to our mayor, our city council, our state reps about these issues, and not just elected officials. How about your school board, your workforce development boards, your economic development corporations? All these entities are civic institutions that shape our lives, but the entrepreneurial voice hasn't been fully communicated within all these institutions.
Well, and everybody who runs all those, they're voters. All those, they're the people that you need to reach anyway, right?
They're the people that they want to serve them. They just haven't heard from us. So we need to get involved.
Where's Kansas City sit on your right to start spectrum right now in terms of its, and I don't just mean Kansas City, Missouri, I mean more generally the metropolitan region. I know climate change, I mean the Climate Action Coalition, the Climate Action KC, everybody rallied around that. I feel like as a community we have taken a big step back from where we were maybe 5 years ago in terms of the political support for entrepreneurship. Where do you see that, I guess?
Well, I'd say relative to other cities, Kansas City does pretty well because of work like this. I mean, great work in the community. There's a lot of civic engagement at this level of ecosystems. You've got a lot of legacy of the Kauffman Foundation being here, and it's been able to seed and support a lot of really useful entrepreneurial support organizations, government policies, civic involvement around entrepreneurship. And I've loved being here. I mean, this has been such a beautiful, magical community. I've loved the people here and the community. And the community, in many ways, feels like it's sort of waking up with its energy at a large scale with the new airport and with all the visibility on the national world stage that's happened recently, and through sports and other high-profile things. I think where there's opportunity is to kind of take it to that next level of like activism, like citizen activism around this issue, and making this something that people really care about. If there's anything that Kansas City has, people here are so nice and polite that they often don't fully. You go to like New York or California, and people will brag about things that they're actually not really good at. And here in Kansas City, people will be humble about things that they're awesome at. It's sort of the opposite thing. And so there's just really great things here, and people just need to be more vocal and activist about it. And I think the civic engagement around entrepreneurship issues at large would be one really critical piece of that.
Local support for some of the policies that you've put forward from an advocacy perspective, how's that?
There's opportunity. You could do a lot more here. Yeah.
Activate us. Tell us where we could do better, and we will go activate against those things or for those things. Well, that's, I guess, my question is: do we have a chapter?
Not yet.
What's it take?
Someone to raise their hands and say they want to start organizing a chapter.
Craig, raise your hand.
We got people around who want to start chapter.
Craig Moore just raised his hand, ladies and gentlemen. He's got his third job now.
All right.
I'll raise my hand with you. I'll raise my hand with you, Craig. We'll do this again. We'll do it together again. So
yeah, and by the way, these chapters we're co-creating these right now. Like, what does a chapter do? It's sort of like the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts. Like, we don't have all the handbooks and badges yet. We got to design this stuff together. So
that's what entrepreneurs do.
Entrepreneurs got to design it together.
Fantastic.
For a volunteer chapter, it's a volunteer salary. We do have sponsored chapter work where we hire field organizers, and we actually pay field organizers. And that's something that philanthropy has been really supportive of. So Kauffman helped us seed some of the work in Kansas and Missouri. But if you know any sponsors, we can actually hire like staffing to build up on that too. So we have volunteer work and we have sponsored work. We're allowing people multiple pathways.
The one thing that we do have here that and it's growing every day is an active group of volunteers, an active group of community against this issue. So if we need to start a chapter here, we'll make it happen. I was unaware, I guess, that we didn't have one. It would make sense to me. And so I guess just in full transparency and honesty, I think one of the problems we have in Kansas City, and I say this with all the love in my heart, is that Kaufman is here. Because I think part of that creates a complacency in the community that Kaufman's got it. Like Kaufman's here, Kaufman's got it, and that nobody else needs to do anything. And by nobody else, none of the other civic organizations. You go talk to them and they're like, well, we don't do that, Kaufman does that. And I think that creates some complacency or they don't see their role in that because there's already a big brand, a global brand, an iconic brand of entrepreneurship that's in the room. And they don't want to step on their toes. They don't want to get in their way. They feel like they've got it already. And so on one hand surprises me we don't have a chapter because it kind of started here, and we've got Kaufman here. But on the other hand, it doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think you're right. People kind of take it for granted here. Like, oh, there'll always be kind of this layer of entrepreneurial support here. But I'll tell you, at Kaufman, and when you're when you're in a philanthropy, a large philanthropy, because when you're not in it, you think, well, they must have it all figured out. And then when you get inside it, and my colleagues there will appreciate this too, it's like you realize, actually, we depend completely on what people are doing out there.
Right.
Like Kaufman is only as good and effective as the organizations on the ground. And I emphasize that all the time within the organization there. Like we are actually we are service agents for the people on the ground. Like Kaufman can only do so much, right? Large philanthropies they're good check writers, but they're not running the organizations and the operations. Right.
All right. So start a chapter, become activists, activate against. So what kind of things do you want to see the average citizen do? Like what kind of questions should they be asking their city council members or their school board members? Like, what are those, like, you give us some sound bites that we should be asking, that we should be kind of pushing as we have these conversations, especially as we walk into this political season right now, where these forums should be everywhere.
Well, the simplest thing, and here's the trick with a lot of entrepreneurship issues, is they're kind of wonky issues, like one-stop shops. I mean, we get it, but it's not like people get riled up about one-stop shops, right? One-stop shops. But the thing that does move people around entrepreneurship is the stories, and the stories of struggle and the pain that entrepreneurs go through. Entrepreneurship is an act of heroism every single time. And so what it takes to pull that off does not get told very much, right? Those stories need to be told. And when you tell those stories, then the flip side of it is, well, we should do something about that. And so from a ordinary citizen, like, how do you do this? Whether it's your city council, your mayor, your state reps, or others, or even your family or your friends or your neighbors, just say, oh yeah, I've been starting this business, or I know someone's starting a business. Here's what they've been struggling with. Because what happens with entrepreneurship in this country, especially now with all the home businesses that have been moved online, it's very quiet. Like, you've probably got like a dozen neighbors that are running home businesses you don't know about, right? And they're struggling with all kinds of issues, and they're dealing with a lot of things in the quiet. And so we keep that fairly quiet. We need if it's quiet, then no one knows the problems, and then no one does anything about them. So you've got to talk about this stuff. And so things like this series of conversations you have here are really important because they talk about these honest things. Things like 1 Million Cups are really important because they talk about the challenges that people are facing. And I think getting those stories out there is really important. Policy leaders are moved by data, and they're moved by stories because they know that data is sort of scientific evidence that something works better than not. And stories are like, that's a voter. That's someone that actually could, is a citizen I care about.
You got time for a few questions?
Yeah, sure.
Can we do a little mic run? I got it. I'll keep us on time. I'll do my best to keep us on time.
All right, check. All right, so you say the most important part of an entrepreneur is their story. I have kind of like a two-phase question. One, do you feel like entrepreneurs are different from people who start nonprofit organizations, or are they the same, right? Because it is a business. And also, why are you not pushing more people to start nonprofit organizations if the story is what's most important, and if it's usually heroism and doing good things in the community? that's a social venture, right? And that's usually a nonprofit organization that can be funded by philanthropy. I think there's a big disconnect between my community and philanthropy in general. A lot of people don't even know what it is. They don't know that there's free money out there for doing good things and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering why that's not talked about more, and why you guys don't push people to do that instead of starting a business or a small brick and mortar.
Well, I certainly think of nonprofits as entrepreneurial. I mean, Right to Start 3 years ago was brand new, and we're still very much a startup. So and this was actually something that was, and we did this at Kauffman over the last few years as well when I was there, was to shift entrepreneurship from it's about tech bros, doing their tech startups, to actually it's about everyone that wants to create something of value and make things better in the world. And so really expanding the definition of entrepreneurship writ large so it encompasses everybody. People, actually, it's like memories are short. A decade ago, entrepreneurship in this country, when you talk to policy leaders or even the ordinary citizen, it was about tech startups, like, in Silicon Valley. It was like a very narrow definition. And there's still a lot of folks that do think that, but overall, it's really shifted. I think there's been a broadening of that. And it makes sense, too, because that's actually what happens in the world. There was a study that Intuit did recently and said 91% of businesses they surveyed were tech-enabled businesses. Like, that's only 9% of businesses are like non-tech businesses now. Like, everything's a tech company. Like, what's not a tech company? And one of the great stories I think of is the story of Dot's Pretzels. You guys ever have Dot's Pretzels? You probably had that. You know where that company started from? It's like a town of like 1,000 people in North Dakota. This woman named Dot was going to parties in her neighborhood and didn't like the pretzels that people were serving, and so she came up with her own pretzel recipe. And so she started serving it to her friends, and they liked it, and people started asking her for more of it. She started making a business out of it. A year and a half ago, she sold it to Hershey for over $1 billion, that company, right? From a small town in North Dakota making pretzel seasoning. So this is what's possible now, like, tech-enabled businesses that can reach scale quickly, making all kinds of things. It's a different environment now. So I think entrepreneurship, we've got to shift the way people think about entrepreneurship from being it's only this kind of business to it's actually anybody making anything of value that makes things better in the world, and we can support that process.
And when you guys are thinking about the policy related to those things, the support for different types of entrepreneurs are different, though, right? Like the support there's some common things that you can advocate for, and then there's different types of support that might happen, like for a local small business versus one that could be regional or one that could grow. How do you think about that when you're developing kind of the position or the things that you're advocating for?
The policies we've put on the Right to Start website, we have a field guide for policymakers, and you can look at it. And the ideas are actually pretty, they're universal ideas that apply whether you're creating a nonprofit or a tech startup or a home bakery or whatever. Because there are things like reducing the red tape to start a business, or expanding capital access, or government contracting. So right now, government contracts tend to go to big companies that know how to work the system. It's very hard for new entrants to break into government contracts. And in fact, in the federal government, in the last 2 decades, there's been a 79% decline in new entrants moving into the federal contracting world because it's so hard to break into these things. So opening that up. So that's been a big part of our work, is basically shifting like the systemic barriers that keep new entrants, young entrepreneurs from getting into the system. And that's universal, whether it's a tech startup or anything else.
Victor, we're out of time. I could sit here and talk to you all night.
We could talk for hours, man.
I have a microphone.
Oh, Horst got a microphone. All right, one more question.
I just didn't want to yell my next question out. I know I did that earlier. I just didn't want to, I wanted to do it appropriately. First off, great presentation. Thank you for joining us today and, and explaining things to us, especially with the site. I had a quick question about, you kind of tapped into it with the whole Dot's Pretzel story and entrepreneurship. I was wondering if how this could be communicated as kind of an uneven playground for tech startups, because it seems to me that there's a lack of willingness to risk when it comes to entrepreneurship, especially in the technology field. Innovation is all over the place. People have great ideas, like you just mentioned earlier, all the time. There's new technology coming out when it comes to gamification, NFTs, digital, everything digital. But there's no risk that is being afforded to the little kids in the playground, the entrepreneurs, and more so to the big companies that have already proven themselves. So how can we have that conversation to open the door and create more opportunities for those, I'm going to go ahead and say, like me, who are tech entrepreneurs, but at the same time, we don't have the capital, we don't have the access, we don't have the support. And at the end of the day, it's harder for us to move. And therefore, in a world where obsolescence is always right around the corner, we're also running out of time. So I was curious to how we can have that conversation and help move such things forward, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I think what I hear you saying is, why is the whole system seem to be working against you, and it tends to favor big players, whether it's capital access or opening doors to corporate contracts or clients, or just the risk taking in general across pretty much everything, right? And entrepreneurs, they don't die from a single blow; they die from deaths of 1,000 cuts. And when you think of it that way, you realize it is the whole ecosystem that matters. And I'd say a couple things. We could talk for hours about this, but I think one is the system is not working for you. So I'll give one really simple example, which is like economic development. Like, so your ability to find people that are willing to take risk with you, like having organizations like this that provide a place for you to meet other people and connect and get resources, but then other support systems and resources to be able to support you. Right now, for instance, the way economic development has been practiced as an institution doesn't actually flow down to organizations like these, right? You probably didn't get economic development support dollars, or maybe a little bit.
No.
Yeah, see. So, like, this is economic development, but this man has been, doing amazing work and isn't able to get economic development support. And that's because the whole system of the way economic development is done doesn't consider his work economic development, if you believe it or not, right? So the system is just broken. Like, it's sort of last century system. And so we've got to update that and change the way economic development is done. Government contracting is done, corporate access, capital access, all these things are not tilted in your favor. And so I think that is really a big part of the answer is it's a whole community answer. There's no simple answer other than the whole community, and everyone here has got to be part of that answer with you. Having a community like this, having a place like Keystone, it's critical. I mean, entrepreneurs, this is the open door that entrepreneurs need to be able to connect with everything else in a community. And you should have a society and a system that actually supports this and makes it easier. And so without leaders like Kevin, you wouldn't be here. But I'm just a big fan and really appreciative for what you guys are building here. I don't know if that answered your question, but okay. Oh, you're talking about tech in particular and how people are scared of like the risk involved in technology. I see. Yeah, that's a whole thing. Yeah, no simple answer. But I guess the time I spent in Silicon Valley was that realization that it's all in people's heads. Like you can make money off risky stuff if you approach it the right way, but you can't do it if you're the only one doing it. You need like a whole community that supports it and invests in it and nurtures it. And you have people that want to invest in it, team members that want to join you, customers that want to take a chance on you, landlords that want to cut you a break. Like that became the Valley. It's like everyone sort of pitched in their own way. They all thought they could benefit from it, and they all it's got this feedback loop, right? The more people that do it, the easier it gets, and the better the chance for everybody. And so it's like a process where if you can shift like the mindsets of a group of people, you can actually shift an entire economy. But I will say this, which is where it happens, is it actually starts in rooms like these and communities like these, like this Keystone community. Like this is how you transform like a city at large, is by starting with stuff like this and then activating people around it and gluing that network together. And then from there, you create power and you convince more and more people that it's worthwhile doing. And when there were tech booms in the past, that's what happened, is communities formed and people started to like get that energy, and you can do it again.
Yeah, I think Boulder's a good example when you think about cities where that's happened. So, Victor, thanks for a couple of things I want to thank you for. Thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate you being here and sharing the work that you're doing with Right to Start. And I promise nobody leaves until you all sign the document. Thanks for being in Kansas City. Thanks for your 7 years here in Kansas City. I know you're leaving soon, but I know you'll be back. And when you're back, I want you to promise that you'll come back and share kind of updates with us here.
100%.
All right.
And we're moving for family, not because we don't love Kansas City.
Yep. No, I neglected to say that. You've got very good, valid family reasons to be leaving and going home, I guess, or going back to.
Well, I've lived
California.
everywhere. Home for my wife.
Yeah, home for your wife. Fair enough. Oh, mass home. Like that, you got to understand. Like we all know. And then happy birthday. Let me be one of the first to wish you a happy birthday. It's this coming Saturday, right?
Saturday.
Yeah. Cupcakes over there.
Cupcakes.
And then I think there's a journal over there for folks to sign.
We have flyers about Right to Start. And the birthday, I'll add this, which is I'd always wanted to have a big 50th birthday bash, and then mine happened to be during a pandemic. And so I actually could never do that. So this is the second anniversary of my 50th birthday. So I thought, why not just celebrate it with you wonderful people here. So we've got some cupcakes. Thank you, Rochelle, for bringing the cupcakes. And enjoy. Yeah.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for everything that you've done for entrepreneurs in the world, not just here.
Well,
in Kansas City,
thank you,
but in the
Kevin.
world.
Thank you, all of you.
Appreciate it. Yep.